Good evening, viewers. Welcome to this session of teleconferencing. The topic for this evening is the making of modern world and the transition to modern world. And these topics form a part of our MA course in history. The title of the course is Modern World and the course code is MHI2. So this discussion is meant to benefit all those who are MA students and who are students of modern world. But at a general level, I think it is of some interest to all of us to have a discussion on what constitutes modern world and what modern world is all about. Is it possible to discuss, conceptualize and discuss modern world? My name is Salil Mishra. I am from the Faculty of History, Indira Gandhi National Open University. And those of our viewers who have any questions on the discussion that has gone on in the previous session as well as in this session are most welcome to put their question either in Hindi or in English, and I would be very happy to take up that question. Now, as I had said, that these two discussions, the one that went on in the previous session and the one in this session, they should really be seen as two parts of the same discussion. The topics are different, but essentially it's the same story. It's the story of the making of modern world, and the kind of transition that we are going to talk about in this session is really a part of that larger story of the making of modern world. So it's really a continuation. This session is really a continuation from the earlier session. Just to give you an idea about what we have discussed so far, we had said that we will try and discuss the making of modern world by raising 4 questions. The first question was how is modern world different from pre-modern societies, polities, times, pre-modern formations? That was one. Second question was how do we understand modern world? How do we introduce how do we understand and define modern world, the defining features of modern world, the constitutive elements, the internal attributes of modern world. The third question was how did the transition to this modern world take place? And what is the nature of this transition? What is this transition all about? Fourth question is the actual making of this world. Since the 16th centuries till today, how have various forces, processes coalesced together to create the kind of world that we live in today? The world that we live in today has come to be constituted through a certain process. It is a product of that process. How do we understand that process? These are the 4 questions really, which would in some ways complete our story. In the first session, we took up the first 2 questions, and in this session, we will take up the second 2 questions. Let me just very briefly summarize to you our first 2 questions. First question was how is modern world different from pre-modern societies? And we said that modern world is different from pre-modern societies in 3 or 4 crucial ways. First, of course, is that pre-modern societies were very disparate and diverse. Modern world, by comparison, is much more integrated and internally connected. Second thing that we had said was that pre-modern societies were also very heterogeneous in terms of their social institutions. Modern world, by comparison, is much more homogeneous, and its social, cultural institutions are much more of a similar kind. Thirdly, we had said that pre-modern societies, pre-modern world was really flat. It is possible to think of pre-modern world as flat, diverse yet very, very similar. Diversity itself was of a very, very similar kind. Modern world, by comparison, was vertically organized and hierarchical. There is an apex. It had a particular type of domination profile. There is an apex, and rest of the world consists of dominated groups of societies and countries. So it is really all about dominant groups and dominated groups. And fourthly, modern world is different from pre-modern societies in terms of the nature of its political institutions. in pre-modern world, there were diverse types of political institutions. There were empires, there were city-states, there were small kingdoms, there were small political organizations and institutions. By modern world, by contrast, is really divided between a number of nation states, which may be big or small, powerful and weak, but really they are all of a very, very similar kind. And that is why they are all called nation states. They are all externally sovereign, internally representative, and characterized by cultural homogeneity. So these are the 4 ways in which we discussed how modern world was different really from pre-modern societies. What constitutes modern world? How do we understand and define modern world? We had said that modern world is not just contemporary world or the world today, and the whole of world certainly has not become modern. There is so much of pre-modern forms of living, pre-modern institutions, pre-modern forces, pre-modern ideologies which have entered into the modern world, and they are flourishing. They are there, sometimes competing, sometimes in a relationship of coexistence with modernity. So they exist, and yet there is something very, very distinctive about modern world. What is that? And a very brief way of looking at it is to see it as a kind of an interplay of 3 different things. Modern world may be understood, may be characterized by a very, very distinctive type of economy, which is based on growth, industrial economy, industrialism. It's characterized by a very different type of social structure, which can be characterized through the digits of urbanization, individualization, secularization, among other things. And thirdly, a very, very distinctive type of state, very distinctive type of political institutions and practices. And we are talking about nation state systems and democracies. And all the important thing is that all the 3 are linked to each other. So social structures, political institutions and economic structures, they are linked to each other, they are connected to each other. One exists because of the other, one feeds into the other. There is a kind of an integrated thing, they are part of the whole. Now that's something again very distinctively modern, because this was not how the political institutions and the economic institutions were not so linked to each other in pre-modern times. So that's really the crux of what we call the modern world. Now we come to the 2 questions. The remaining 2 questions. First is the transition. How does the transition to take place? And second is the actual making of modern world. Now friends, this question of transition is really very tricky and has been understood in different ways and has been explained in different ways, and yet it remains a kind of a mystery. There is no really consensus on this. The consensus is on that a great transformation has occurred, but how to account for it, how to explain it, there is not so much of a consensus. There is still a mystery. Let's try and understand the mystery, even though we may not be able to unravel the mystery. But let's just understand the digits of the problem. The history of mankind can be seen as consisting of 3 stages: the hunting-gathering, the agrarian, and the industrial. Now, when I say this, it is not a consensus idea. Many people may not agree with it. This would seem to be a very, very economistic, very, very material kind of explanation of the division of human history. Other people may like to divide human history in different ways, and they have done so. Someone might say that mankind has passed through 3 stages: the stage of magic, the stage of religion, and the stage of science. Now you can say that these are not non-material, non-economistic categories. James Fraser, the leading 19th century anthropologist, he provided this division. He said most of mankind lived through practiced magic, and then second stage was that most of mankind, magic was in some ways replaced by religion. Magic remained, but religion also came into it, and by religion he was really talking about the institutionalized, doctrinal world religions: Christianity, Islam, Judaism. And the third stage is that of science. Now these 3 categories are very, very different from our earlier categories of hunting, gathering, agrarian, industrial. Someone else might say that the history of mankind is that of religion, metaphysics, and positivism. That is how the leading sociologist and philosopher Auguste Comte, that's how he divided. The idea of positivism is associated with him. He did not initially look upon positivism as a kind of approach. He looked at it as a kind of a stage in the history of mankind, in probably the intellectual history of mankind, that mankind understood the world through religion, then through metaphysics, and then finally through positivism. So friends, there can be many ways in which we look upon it, but I think we are persisting with our earlier materialistic division of mankind, the hunting-gathering, the agrarian, and the industrial. Now these are three stages, which means that if we live in a three-stage world, three-stage history, then there have to be two huge transitions. A, transition from stage 1 to B, 1 to 2, A to B, and then transition from B to C. So we are talking about two huge transitions. Transition from hunting-gathering to agrarian, and transition from agrarian to industrial. Now, that both these transitions are matters of some kind of debate, there is some kind of contest on it. The transition that interests us today is really the transition from the agrarian to industrial. Why is it so much of a mystery? Why is this transition, this transformation so much of a mystery? I think this transformation is a mystery because of the manner in which agrarian and industrial societies have been understood. The manner in which they've been understood is that they are so fundamentally different from each other that we simply cannot explain how one gave way to the other. Why is this a question? Let me complicate the picture. On the face of it, it may seem a very simple problem that from a situation A, we made a transition. Most of mankind, or all of mankind, made a transition to stage B. It seems very simple. But if we try and focus on stage A and stage B, and if we see how dramatically different they are, then the plot thickens, then picture becomes more complicated. Then we need to try and explain this transition and not just state it. It is easier to state and describe the transformation, but it is much more difficult to account for it. Let us just look at these two stages. What is an agrarian society? Most of mankind, all of mankind lived in an agrarian society, so much that we actually call it the agrarian world or agraria, agrarian times, and the length of the agrarian stage is something like 10,000 years, which basically means that at the starting point of these 10,000 years, I beg your pardon, at the starting point of this 10,000 years and at the end of this 10,000 years, there were still similarities. The manner of doing things had not undergone a very, very basic fundamental change. And after that, that change began to occur. So the industrial formation was very dramatically different. So how do we understand an agrarian society? Well, an agrarian society can really be understood by two things. A, first, it is based on the production of food, cultivation, agriculture, production of food. And second, it's based on stable technology. Now these two features virtually define the entire spectrum of agrarian societies and the agrarian stage. The first distinguished the agrarian stage from the hunting and gathering bands, hunting gathering times, hunting gathering stage, and second from the industrial stage. Hunting gathering, the idea of food production is absent. They must gather and hunt. That's why they're called hunters and gatherers. Agrarian society, by comparison, is based on the production of food. Now you can grow your food, you can produce your food. Second feature is that it's based on stable technology. Now, stable technology is an important feature because industrial society is based on a completely unstable and constantly growing technology. Now, it's amazing that during this length of 10,000 years, various changes came about within agrarian societies. And yet, technology did not change. If we have the modern meaning of change, if by change we mean the kind of changes that have taken place in the last 3 centuries and especially in the 20th century. By our current understanding of change, if we look back at the agrarian times, then we can see that not much of a change took place in technology. It remained more or less the same. The basic terms of technology remained more or less the same. The changes that came about internally within agrarian societies were of two kinds, of course. There were the illiterate agrarian societies, which did not possess the written word, and societies that were agroliterate societies, in which written word was available. So culture could be codified, could be stored, written knowledge could be generated and could be passed on with the help of the written word. That's one. And second change that takes place is that a political institution, political coercion, political centralization of some kind emerges in some of them. In other words, a state. So early agrarian societies managed without a state, but gradually a state came into being. So the changes that take place in this 10,000 years within the world of agrarian societies are of two kinds, pertaining to the availability of the written word, that creates agro-literate societies, and changes pertaining to political coercion, political centralization, beginning of a state. At the level of technology, very dramatic changes do not take place. Changes that take place actually are in comparison with today's standards, or the standards of 20th century, or the standards of the last 3 centuries, they are some kind of a superficial kind. Now the organization of these agrarian societies is such that you do not see any possibility of a change or a transformation. This society is based upon very limited creation of wealth. That is, wealth has got to be stored and defended. It has two types of coercions, the state and the clerisy. Now they really constitute the powerful group. Population does not increase because the available food, there is a ceiling on the availability of food. Therefore, people must starve and die. Therefore, there is no dramatic increase in the kind of population. There is indeed no incentives for an increase in the output of food, because those who are producing the output, they in any case are going to lose it. It's going to be taken away from them. So they don't have any incentives. Now, system is really, in other words, very closed. It's like a circle. It's closed and it's complete. It's impossible to see how one can break out of this system. This was what Karl Marx called the idiocy of rural life. It constituted a complete whole. And yet we know that mankind did break out of it. There was an exit point, and that exit point was towards the transition towards industrialism. Now, how did this transition took place? We know that a transformation took place. But looking at the manner in which the agrarian society was constituted, it's very difficult to see how this transformation could have taken place. And yet it did take place. So it has got to be explained. And how to explain this? Well, friends, there exists with us a whole range of explanations. And we need not go into all of them, but the standard, most representative, most well orchestrated explanations, of course, one of them pertains to the transition from feudalism to capitalism. That is to say, change, transformation feudalism is seen as the kind of matrix for capitalism. This change did not happen all over the world. It happened in certain agrarian societies. It happened in some agrarian societies where the principles of organization were characterized by what is called feudalism, the feudal societies of Western Europe. A weak center, a strong, powerful, military landed class, and serfs working for them. Lot of the power and wealth was concentrated into the hands of this middle layer of the military and landed gentry class. A kind of a conflict of interests takes place with the creation of more and more cities and a creation of an alternative class, burghers and the traders and their interests, and how the state begins to lean in favor of this urban class, and that creating a kind of a conflict which eventually leading to a new type of social formation, a new type of system. So change Feudalism is as a particular type of, within agrarian societies, a particular type of agrarian society is seen as the matrix of capitalism. There are other explanations of church-state dualism, a certain division of power between the church and the state. Restrained state is yet another explanation. Protestant ethic, Protestantism is yet another explanation. That Protestant movement, it created a certain climate, it made way for a particular type of entrepreneurial ethic, spirit, particular type of bureaucratization, particular type of practices, all of which cumulatively went into the making of the modern industrial society. This, however, remains an extremely contested zone. The contest is not over whether this or that is the correct explanation, but which set of factors are much better off in enabling us to explain the big transformation. So the fact of transformation is not, there's no debate about that. How to account for transformation is a matter of debate, and here also the candidates for explanations are not really rival candidates, but a set of explanations need to be taken, need to be combined together to enable us to explain this transformation. But the transformation did occur. A transformation, call it from feudalism to capitalism, from agraria to industria, from agrarian world to industrial world, or from pre-modern world, pre-modern societies to modern world. I think more or less they mean the same thing with minor difference in emphasis. Now we come to the fourth, the last, and actually the most important question about the making of the modern world. Once this transformation occurred, and this transformation was not a one-point transformation, this transformation was not from point A to point B. It took us from point A to point B, but point B was really a process. A certain process was initiated, certain forces were set in motion from 16th century onwards, which transformed the world. And the world that exists today can be better understood by focusing on those forces, those institutions, those structures, which were set in motion since the 16th century. So the rest of the discussion, we have about 15 to 20 minutes. We will try and explain this, and I will try, because there isn't much time, I would like to explain it to you more in the form of a story or a plot. Let us say, I think the modern world as it exists can, and how it has come to be, if we were to explain that, I think we can do it very well with the help of 3 digits, or let's say 3 words. Modern world today can be understood by a particular type. The 3 words would be domination. The 3 words would be integration, domination, and affluence. That is to say, the modern world today has come to be integrated in a particular way since the last 5 centuries. 2, affluence. It is also characterized by generation of tremendous wealth and affluence. There's tremendous affluence in the modern world. And 3, it has a particular type of domination profile. All the 3 things, integration, affluence, and domination, did not really exist earlier on. Let us briefly take these 3 up one by one. What do we mean by integration of the modern world? We had said at the beginning of the last session that previous societies were much more diverse and disparate, and modern world is much more integrated. What do we really mean by integration? I think what we mean is that around the beginning of the 16th century, end of the 15th century, a certain pattern of trade and conquest began to emerge. The nature of the trade was such that large parts of the world, of the continent, gradually got sucked into this process and became a part of this process. How did this happen? Let me just briefly tell you more like a story. For various reasons, the year 1492 has been considered very important in the history of modern world and as the beginning of the modern world. And what happened in 1492? in 1492, what happened was that a sailor by the name of Christopher Columbus, he sailed from Portugal, from Atlantic Europe, and because of certain political turbulences in the Ottoman Empire and that part, his idea was to find a new route to Asia, to India. And by this time, the knowledge existed that the world was round. So he felt that instead of going east, that is to say going towards Eastern Europe and towards Asia, if that route was blocked through the sea, he could go west and yet come to India, because the world was after all round. He was helped in this by the government, by the state, with money, etc. And he sailed and he landed at a new society, a new place. He thought that was India, and which is why that part, Latin America, the people there called Indians, Red Indians. Now, that was obviously not India, but Columbus found actually a route to America. He actually discovered America, as it is said. 6 years later, Vasco da Gama, through the rounding of the Cape of Good Hope, he found another route to India. Now, why was this important? This was important because it gave the societies and countries of Western Europe a new route to America. Now, this new route was fully utilized by the sailors and the traders, and they went to these areas. When they went to these areas, and by the way, these European societies already had certain technological advantages in shipping and warfare. So they could fight well, and they had better ships which could travel for long. So with the help of these two advantages, they went to Latin American societies, and there they found that there were gold and silver mines. So with the help of the native population, they started this process of mining of these areas, of the silver minings. Now this silver gave them tremendous wealth. Now, the working conditions there were really harsh, and they took their toll on the local population, and many of them died. Now, it is said that during the 16th centuries, one estimate is that the population of Mexico was reduced to 1/3 of what it was. Another statement is much more serious. It says that from 25 million population, it was reduced to 0.5 million by the end of the century, which meant that there was a population loss at a massive, unprecedented level in these societies. It actually created a shortage of labor. Now, when a shortage of labor happened, then new labor had to be recruited. Now, this new labor was procured, was obtained from African slaves were got to work in mines, in American mines, plantation mines and other mines, silver mines. So, the estimate is that something like 13 million slaves were brought. 13 million slaves were brought from the shores of Africa into the Americas, into the new world, the new society, the new land that had been discovered. Now, in this process only, in the process of traveling, 3 million of them died. Now, these slaves, when they came to this land, they obviously did not go back. They lived there as citizens, and their ancestors, the generations after that are still there. Now, this trade, in which now you can see 3 continents are being linked: Europe, America and Africa. Now, this brings tremendous wealth to the continents to European continent, to the countries of Atlantic Europe. It was said that at that stage, almost 80% of the silver of the entire world was available in these European societies, and most of it obviously had been procured through the mines. So at a time in times when gold and silver was considered to be precious wealth, this wealth was being made available for the European societies. Now, European societies were into trade with India and China. Silver, spices, indigo, silk and spices. Now, this enabled these European countries, this facilitated their trade with India because they got a lot of the wealth. Now, this was the time when certain ideas of mercantilism were in vogue in these European societies, and it was believed that gold and silver constitute the wealth of a society and they should not be squandered or thrown away. Now, this was the time when East India Company, which came to India and other companies went to other parts, they used to indulge in trade since the 16th century with these societies. When they indulged in trade, they bought things with money, with gold and silver. They also sold things. So they bought silk and indigo and spices from India. But now, in the 18th centuries, after the Battle of Plassey, when they actually got a right to tax these territories. Now, when they were able to tax these territories, East India Company actually became a state in these parts, firstly in Plassey, then in Buxar, in whole of Bengal, and then other parts, and gradually the whole of the country, whole of India, and other societies also, other Asian countries also. Now, they did not have to use the gold and silver, their gold and silver, to buy Indian goods. Now, the Indian goods, the indigo and the silk and spices and other things, they could now be purchased with the help of the taxes that were being raised in India. So now look at the kind of advantage it gives these European societies. Their slaves, the gold and silver come from the American mines. The workers in those American mines come from Africa. Lot of the wealth comes, lot of the trading items, spices come from Asia, and all of them add greatly to the wealth of these societies because they don't really have to pay for it. Silk is very popular in African chiefs. Now, African chiefs will give their African slaves if they get silk. Now, that silk is obtained from India. With the help of the silk obtained from India, they get black slaves from Africa, and those black slaves go and work in the plantation mines, in the silver mines, produce silk, produce silver and gold, and that silver comes to the European societies. So from all sides, there's tremendous wealth that flows into Europe, into Atlantic Europe, European countries. What it also does is that you can see that the nature of the new trade is that large parts of the world are getting integrated, all the continents, Africa, both the Americas, Asia, and also Australia by the settlers there. So in a way, there is a pattern of trade, there is a new type of trade, and the conquest along with it, which actually integrated the world in a manner that never before had happened. There used to be trade earlier, but this interconnected nature of trade did not exist earlier. Let me give you just one example of the nature of this interconnected trade, and then you will understand what I mean. Let me give you the example of sugar. Around the 16th and the 17th centuries, sugar started being manufactured in Latin American countries, American societies. Now, this sugar, the workers who were working towards the making of sugar, they came from Africa. Now, this sugar was added to tea, which came from the East Asia, and coffee that came from West Asia, to be eventually consumed by the aristocracy of Europe. So the example of sugar and tea, it tells us how integrated trade was taking place. Working force of Africa, sugar from Latin America, tea from East Asia, coffee from West Asia, and all of that being consumed by the aristocracy in Europe, rich aristocracy. This is the nature of the interconnected trade. So this integration that takes place through trade and conquest and settlements and migrations is one important feature of modern world. Now, we've got about 5-6 minutes more. Let me also quickly give you two other features which explain the modern world. First I said was integration. Second I said is affluence. Now the affluence is really the story of the Industrial Revolution. It's an 18th century story. The kind of wealth that existed was more or less being rotated. It was not being increased in a very big manner. Now, it began to increase since the 18th century with the application of science and technology to the production process, to the production sphere. It happened for the first time in cotton textiles, in which various aspects of the growing of cotton, spinning, picking, growing, spinning, picking, weaving, yarns, making into cloth, all that, all these processes got really mechanized. And when one sector got mechanized, for instance, if making yarn out of cotton got mechanized, which meant that it all started happening very fast, but that means that more and more cotton was required. Therefore, picking of the cotton had to be made faster. Therefore, more and more technology had to be applied there. So the technology was applied there. So more cotton could be obscured, could be procured, and then so that the making of yarn became faster, and so on. So this was the first sector, the textile industry, which got fully industrialized, which got fully mechanized, where the idea of the application of science and technology to the production sphere was first applied. And then gradually it extended to other sectors, chemicals and other sectors, petroleum much later, coal, railways, steam. So all these things in a way added greatly to the wealth. Now, two things that need to be said about this generation of tremendous wealth and affluence is, firstly, its unevenness. The generation of wealth itself is very uneven both within countries and across countries. Certain countries become very, very rich. Certain others are untouched by it initially. And within countries, certain classes become very rich and prosperous. So there is great unevenness to it. But nonetheless, the fact that tremendous wealth begins to be generated, enlarged, at a very fast rate, at an unprecedented rate, at a rate unknown to mankind till then, that process is very important. How is this done? There are two ways in which wealth begins to be generated. First, of course, is the linking of cognitive growth with economic growth, the application of science and technology. That, of course, we said. Second is by the use of the environment, natural resources. Now, natural resources begin to be seen as investable wealth. Now, use of that, use of wood, use of jungle, the use of all the natural resources, and they're being placed at the service of maximization of output. So, environment being subjected to being made a part of the economic development. That's another new thing that happens. The attitude to environment in pre-modern times was very different. This notion that natural resources is like a wealth in the hands of mankind, and this wealth was seen as inexhaustible, so you could exploit it as much as you could. This was the second major way in which this wealth was being generated. And this kept being generated through the 18th century, from the 18th century through the 19th century and the 20th century. With all the unevenness within the country and unevenness between countries. So unevenness of country and class categories, that remained, yet the affluence of the world was a very, very important factor. It had two or three manifestations. Let me quickly tell you. First, of course, was life expectancy increased, availability of foodstuff increased. So famines, which were a usual occurrence in pre-modern times, now became rare, now became tragic catastrophes if there was a famine. In pre-modern times, famine was not seen as unusual or catastrophic. Now more and more food was available, life expectancy increased because there was food to eat, size of middle class increased. Even today in rich developed countries, something like 70 to 80% constitutes the middle class. In not so rich countries, the size of the middle class is about 10 to 15 to 20%, but nonetheless the size of the middle class has been on an increase. This middle class has a consumption pattern which is very, very different from pre-modern times. To take the example of India, it might surprise you that the average life expectancy in India was 32 years at the time of independence. When we became independent, the average life was 32 years. In the last 50 years, with whatever growth we've had, our green revolution and other technological advances, that has now gone up to 65. The world life expectancy is around that 65 to 70. So you can see how it increases. The population increased manifold. The population of the world in 1800, 200 years before, was 500 million. Now in the last 2 centuries, it has increased. It is now 6 billion plus. It has increased 12 times. So the population of the world, which had remained somewhat stationary, increasing a little bit, decreasing a little bit, but remaining more or less there till 1800. And suddenly after 1800, there has been a very rapid, phenomenal increase in population. Now it is stabilizing in some countries, but some countries it is still growing. The growth of population is largely a result of the decline in death rate. Fewer and fewer people are dying. People are now also dying natural deaths. The life expectancy has gone up. These are all manifestations of the kind of affluence that has been brought about to modern world. Life expectancy has increased, available food has increased, and also urbanization and so on. So this affluence is another very important part of modern world, of the history of modern world. It is a very important component of modern world. Lastly, friends, we don't have the time. Lastly is that this modern world, because of affluence and domination, has come to acquire a particular type of domination profile, which we had said. It has had different types of leaders in the 6th, 17th, 18th centuries. Spain and Portugal were the leaders. Then that apex shifted to England and France. England became the leader of the world with the Industrial Revolution. Later it shifted to various other European countries, and America being one of them. America really joined. So the domination profile has undergone certain changes, but nonetheless it has rotated among certain actors, and it still continues to have a particular type of domination profile. So if we have to make a sense of modern world, understand modern world, the making of modern world, we can do it meaningfully through the digits of integration, through the digits of affluence, and through the digits of domination. Well, friends, we've come to the end of our discussion. We've got about 2 minutes. In the 2 sessions that we had, we tried to raise 4 questions, all related to modern world. First was how modern world is different from pre-modern formations and times. Second was how do we define and understand modern world? What are the ideas that constitute modern world? Third was how has the transformation taken place from agrarian to industrial, from pre-modern to modern, from feudal to capital, whichever you say, feudal to capitalist, the transformation, the nature of transformation, the explanation for the transformation, for big transition. And third was what are the features, how to account for this modern world, the making of the modern world, which we did through the digits of integration, affluence, and domination. Well, friends, with that we come to the end of the discussion. I hope I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this discussion on the making of modern world. Thank you very much.